Hi, my name is Shira Epstein. I onboarded this summer as the new Senior Director of Adult Engagement. So I get to work with the best of the best at Central Synagogue. And I really, truly look forward to getting to know each and every one of you. But we are here today to be at this pre-neg to learn a bit more on the ground as the first in our series of Inside Israel. And I want to start off by introducing member of Knesset, Gilad Kariv. Rabbi Gilad Kariv is an Israeli politician, religious leader, and lawyer, serving as the first non-Orthodox rabbi in the Knesset and number 3 in the Israeli Labor Party. Thank you. And if that is not enough, he has a long and distinguished career in public service, having previously served as the president and CEO of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. He is also a recognized expert on issues relating to civil rights, social justice, religion, and state in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In his first term in the Knesset, Kariv served as the chair of the Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee, and over the last 2 years has dedicated himself to the battle on the Israeli democracy. He was one of the leading voices of the opposition against the judicial reform and stood among the Israeli protests from the very beginning. Member of Knesset, Kariv has a master's degree in law and in Jewish philosophy. He lives with his wife, Noah, and 3 children in the city of Givatayim. I believe you all know Rabbi Sarah Berman. And thank you. We look forward to learning from you.
Thank you, Shira. All right, Gilad, welcome. Let me first ask you, it's the worst question to ask an Israeli and the first question every American asks. How are you doing?
So almost Shabbat Shalom to all of you and good evening. Thank you for coming here in order to have this discussion. I'll start by thanking you, Rabbi, for the format of this event. After flying all night, the idea that I will give a presentation is not the smart way to move forward. Either I will not be able to say a decent sentence in English, or I will not be able to end the response. So I want to ask you to be an Israeli in showing me when is the time to move forward, okay? Thank you. Now, it's not a secret that the last 11 months in Israel are extremely challenging and difficult. I shared with Rabbi Marla that when I left the Israeli Reform movement in order to serve in the Knesset, I said to myself, well, I'm going to have great time. I don't need to deal with salaries. I don't need to deal with rabbis. I don't need to deal with lay leaders. And then I discovered that I chose a political career during quite intensive days because of domestic and internal challenges. And after October 7th, of course, the external threats that we face. I'm thinking, what is the best way to share with an audience that is quite educated about the situation in Israel, that care about what is happening in Israel, how to share with you daily life in Israel in the last 11 months. And I will share with you 2 things. One is that recently I listed down all the things I bought to the shelter in our building. Now, I do not live in a southern community. I don't live close to the northern border. I'm not close to the West Bank. I live in central Israel, in one of the nicest suburbs of Tel Aviv. And my family spent thousands of new Israeli shekels in the last 11 months in order to place supply and equipment in our shelter. Now, it's not about the money. It's about raising 3 kids, 3 teenagers in Israel that see their parents pushing supply, food supply to the shelter, buying, water tanks, things that we never experienced, in central Israel. And the other thing I want to share with you is that, as a rabbi, I'm in the business of sad life cycle events. In my 30 years of involvement in the Reform movement, I worked with many grieving families. As a congregational rabbi, as one of the leaders of the movement, I'm asking you to try to understand the meaning of attending more than 200 funerals in few months. In starting the day at 10 a.m. in the military cemetery of Tel Aviv in Kiryat Shaul, and leaving the cemetery at 10 p.m. because you are representing the Knesset in 5, 6, or 7 funeral of fallen soldiers. It's about opening, our WhatsApp group of friends from my high school years in order to discover that one of our friends lost her son on October 7th. In one of my first private visits to the US years ago with my ex-girlfriend, I saw the play 6 Degrees of Separation. And I always said that in Israel, in the Jewish world, it's about 3 degrees of separation. And in Israel, it's about 1.5 degrees of separation. And it's a very nice joke to share with your audience. But in some of the gatherings I led since October 7th, I asked people to raise their hand if they knew one of the victims of October 7th, if they know one of the fallen soldiers since October 7th or their close family, if they know one of the families of the hostages or one of the families that had to leave their houses 11 months ago. And 2/3 of the audience is raising their hands. And this is the new Israeli reality. And it's something we never experienced. It's really a different world in Israel nowadays.
And that's going to continue playing out in culture, in religious life, and in politics. So I want to look at politics for just a moment. As a member of Knesset, as a Chaver Knesset, you have an insider view that we do not have access to. We see what our headlines tell us. We see what our news shows tell us. Is there anything that you can share from behind the scenes about the negotiations or relationships or conversations that we don't have access to in our media coverage of Israel?
I'll say the following, although I need to say that most of the things we know in the end reach the press. And many times, even we, the politicians, we learn important parts of the information we need from the open press, the American press, the Israeli press. And unfortunately, I need to say that there aren't so many hidden elements of our challenging reality. I can say that I truly believe there is a very devoted and intensive international effort to reach a second hostages deal. This effort, as you all know, is led by the American administration, but it's important to know that even if we don't hear any new reports or we feel that there aren't any new developments, there is a sincere and a real effort to reach a deal. And the other thing, I think it's important to share with you, and here I must say, I'm not so sure it is well reflected in the global coverage of the situation in Israel. And people, in a way, are a little bit surprised when I say it. You know, we all talk about our desire to prevent a second front in the northern border, or not to have a war with Hezbollah. And the size of the catastrophe of October 7th, or the impact of October 7th, is still so influential that we don't fully understand that we already have a second front. And that today the situation in the northern border of Israel is much more challenging than the situation in the southern border. And while many communities in the south returned to their original communities, and while a new school year was launched in most of the schools in the area surrounding the Gaza Strip, we face today a situation up in the north that we never experienced. Entire cities were evacuated. The residences of the city of Kiryat Shmona are spread in 280 different locations. Try to run a municipal community when people are all around the country. When it comes to internal politics, I will carefully say that in the last few weeks, we do see growing cracks in the current coalition. We can't identify what will be the game changer, the one thing that will create this domino effect for the current government and coalition, but we suddenly see the tensions inside the coalition. And I always say, and I will end with it because you're doing a good work in signaling to me, you're an excellent Israeli moderator. Usually, it's not about the opposition taking down the government. It's about the failure of the coalition. And we start to see some initial signs that they are losing their stability.
So we know you in our community as a member of the opposition. You are not part of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition.
Definitely not.
And I'm nonpartisan. I won't clap, but I will do that. But you are also an active member of the protest movement, first against the judicial reforms that many saw as eroding democracy in the Jewish state, and now on behalf of the hostages and for a deal that will bring them home. So we know that you do this work. I want to know why you do this work. What motivates you to show up for your country in this way?
So first of all, when it comes to my personal motivation, it's the same motivation that led me after the my military service to go to the HEC. It's the same motivation that led me to work with my friends to double and triple the number of Reform congregations in Israel, together with many good friends like Central Synagogue, the URJ, Arza, and many other WRJ, Marla, I saw you, and many other good partners. It's really I'll start differently. Okay. I was born a few days after the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War. Now, it's true that the Yom Kippur War created a crisis, a major crisis to the generation of my parents, because it came 6 years after the great victory of the Six-Day War. And this great victory gave the generation of my grandparents and my parents the feeling that Israel has the ability, the real ability to win any challenge, military challenge. And it was a huge crisis that led also to major political shifts in Israel.
A sea change.
Definitely. It also led to positive things like the peace agreement with Egypt. People tend to forget that usually you reach peace agreements after wars. You don't just reach peace agreements. Usually you have a war and it leads to an understanding that you need to deal with the reality in a different way. But in spite of the victory of 67, the generation of my parents and the generation of my grandparents didn't see the existence of the state of Israel as a given thing. In a way, my generation is the first generation of native Israelis that grew up after 73 with this basic notion that the state of Israel exists. You know, when I was 6 years old, we had a peace agreement with Egypt, with our biggest enemy. And since then, all the military clashes between Israel and Lebanon and the Intifada, it was not about an existential threat to the state of Israel. October 7th changed it. And I think that for my generation and for the generation of our children, it is an important lesson that we really need to engage ourselves in protecting the state of Israel and also protecting its values and character. And this chronological sequence between the battle for Israel's democracy and then after October 7th, the battle before the hostages deal, the battle for responsible leadership, for leadership that understands its role to bring the people together and not to divide the Israeli society. This sequence creates a new era of social and political activism among liberal Israelis. And one of the things we need to do is to harvest this energy in the streets in order to create a sustainable and a long-term base for a liberal Israel or the Israeli democracy.
Do you see that happening? Do you see that base being built?
The answer is yes. Okay, the answer is yes. I think that even in international standards, the strength and the size of the democratic protest in Israel is a lesson that should be learned by many Western societies. Before October 7th, European politicians from Poland, from Hungary, came to Israel to sit with the leaders of the democratic protest in order to understand how do you do it. Right? Of course, in a very natural way, after October 7th, we saw a decline in this protest movement, also because people went to the army, and because we were caught in defending our country. But unfortunately, few months after October 7th, our government started to renew the attempts to change the core values and the core mechanisms of Israel's democracy. And they are doing it with different tools than the one they used before October 7th. They are identifying other targets. It's not mainly the Israeli Supreme Court, it's other fields of our democratic life, but in a very dangerous way. Some serious players in the current coalition are using this emergency situation in order to promote their domestic agenda. And it forces us, while we are fully committed to defend our country, but it also forces us to go back to the streets, first in order to push for a second hostages deal, but also in order to prevent this misuse of the war in order to promote the judiciary coup. The last thing I will say about it is, while we should celebrate the influence of the democratic protest and we should recognize it as a real source of hope, I think when we are being asked what is the main source for optimism today in the liberal democratic camp in Israel, the answer is not the political opposition. It is the people in the streets. But at the same time, we need to remember that the other side is also well organized, and that they prepared themselves and they built their cultural, political, and religious infrastructures in order to be able to meet this opportunity and to change the character of Israel's democracy. So it's a real battle over the soul of Israel.
We've talked about Israel so far, and as a member of Knesset, that is your specialty. You are also someone who has revived the idea of the two-state solution as a pragmatic solution to what's going on. So let's talk for a moment about Palestinians. The two-state solution dropped out of headlines, it dropped out of favor for a number of years, but you are bringing it back. What makes you think that it needs to return, and what makes you think that it's possible at this time?
So first, let's remember that this vision of a political process between Israel and the Palestinians that will end with a two-state solution, this idea in a way was removed from the table much before October 7th. In a way, one of the things that led not in a direct way, but one of the circumstances that enabled this catastrophe is the fact that for the last 10 years, please remember it, for the last 10 years, there is no political dialogue between Jerusalem and Ramallah. The last time that there was a political dialogue was with Secretary Kerry and his initiative in 2014, 2015. Netanyahu didn't meet Abu Mazen for more than a decade. Now, at the same time, there was a daily military security coordination between the IDF and even the Secret Service, the Shabbat and the Mossad, with the security agencies of the Palestinian Authority, meaning that our governments created a growing gap between the political level and the security level. More than that, the right-wing governments, mainly Netanyahu's government, worked in different ways in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority. Now, I'm definitely not a strong advocate of the Palestinian Authority. They learned nothing from the Zionist movement, how you build a pre-state in order to train yourself with the duties of sovereignty. Okay? And again, we can spend many hours talking about their failure. But we cannot avoid the fact that before October 7th, it was Netanyahu's transparent policy not to dialogue with the Palestinian Authority and to identify Hamas at the same time as an enemy, but also as the Palestinian force or player we need to deal with. And in a very crazy way, while we are fighting Hamas in Gaza, and we are fighting Hamas in Gaza, in the West Bank, we repeat this mistake. This government continues to weaken the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas and the pro-Iranian Palestinian forces are entering this vacuum. Now, I hate the fact that the PA government is paying the Palestinian prisoners and their families. Some of them are real evil terrorists. I hate the fact that they are doing it, and I think we need to be very strong in demanding them not to do it. But when we are holding billions of shekels that originally should have been delivered to the Palestinian Authority, and we harm their ability to pay the salaries of the policemen and the security people, we, again, in a way, we are strengthening the more radical Palestinian players. And that is why we need, in spite of all the difficulties, and again, I don't think the two-state solution is around the corner. I don't think that if today we invite Abu Mazen from Ramallah to come to Jerusalem, he is willing to sign a final agreement with Israel. The notion that we are forced to wait to a generational shift is not a false analysis. Yet, after 10 years of not having a political dialogue with the more moderate Palestinian players, we need to talk seriously how we initiate a new political process. And instead of saying two-state solution, let's talk in the coming months and years about the need to rebuild the political trust between the two communities. I don't know if you know, I promise you I will end with it. I don't know if you know that the Oslo agreements that were presented by Rabin and Peretz originally were designed as temporary agreements. It is stated in those agreements that they will be valid for 5 years. Now, let's imagine you leave your cottage cheese in the refrigerators for 2 months. When you discover it and you open the case, you don't tell yourself, well, the manufacturer played it in the wrong way, right? You are the one to be blamed for the fact you didn't do anything with this product. Israel and the Palestinians and the international community are using 30 years old agreements in order to sustain a different reality. Now we are talking security, security, security. 30 years ago, did you carry cellular phones with you? 30 years ago, did we have daily access to internet? No. Do you understand that the communication protocols of the Oslo Agreement were signed 30 years ago? And that they are totally irrelevant to the technological reality that you have today in the West Bank and inside sovereign Israel. And that's the most stupid example I can share with you. So even before we talk about where we draw the border between Israel and Palestine, there is so many things we can do in order to reinitiate, to retrain this muscle, this frozen muscle of talking, of dialoguing, of bringing leaders to sit around the table and to imagine a different reality. And that's what we need to do. And we need to remind people again and again, I will repeat it. 100% of peace agreements between nations are being signed after wars. That's the natural way of life. And that's what we need to do today.
As we come to approaching the end of our time down here together, Rabbi Kariv will be speaking from the bimah, presenting the sermon this evening. I want to ask you the question on the minds of our community for sure. When will there be new elections in Israel? What would the results be? And since you now can see the future, and what are you and your coalition and your allies doing to prepare for that moment?
Definitely, this is a very important question. You know, we have a different system of governance.
Very.
Yes. I need to say there are some advantages in our system, but I will not continue to explore this issue. We are working very hard in order to have early elections, regardless to our huge disputes with Netanyahu and his partners. We think that after such a catastrophe, Israelis should re-elect the leaders that will address this critical moment. You know, and I mentioned the 1973 war. It lasted 19 days. We are now marking the 344th day, third of this war. This is the longest war in the history of Israel, more than the Independence War of 1948. And it's quite clear that it started with a huge failure of the IDF and the intelligence agencies, but also of our political leadership. Golda Meir won the elections in January 1974. She won the elections after the Yom Kippur War, but she resigned 4 months later because of the civil protest against her. So if Golda won the election after the Yom Kippur War and then resigned because of this public demand, it is quite clear that from a moral perspective, regardless to the end game of the next round of elections. Netanyahu doesn't have he has the formal legitimacy to maintain his government, but he doesn't have the moral legitimacy after the failure of October 7th, and we need to go back to the Israeli public. Now, please keep in mind the following fact. Netanyahu didn't win the last elections, we lost them. We lost it. Why I'm saying it? You know that our system is different. And in Israel, usually, if you get the popular vote, you build the coalition and you are the prime minister. Netanyahu's coalition gained 48% of the votes. The anti-Netanyahu bloc gained 52%. But because of the threshold rules, that's the threshold rules, and because we didn't organize our camp in a sophisticated way, we wasted 250,000 votes. It's unbelievable. And my party, and I'm taking the responsibility, my party played a very negative role in this mistake, but by not building the alliance with the other left-wing party, Meretz. And I'm saying it because we need to learn from our mistakes. We cannot have an opposition that doesn't know how to work together. We need to minimize the number of lists in our camp that will run. We cannot allow ourselves anymore a situation that two parties are fighting for the same audience of voters. And the good thing I can share with you is that we are working quietly in order to make sure that we are not repeating those mistakes. As you know, many of you know, Labor and Meretz united and came together, and there is today only one Zionist left-wing party. And I hope that the other parties of the opposition will learn the same lesson.
On another night, we will ask you about coalitions across the middle. We will ask you about coalitions between Jewish and non-Jewish Israelis. But for tonight, because our time is short and Shabbat is coming, not up to us, can you name one or two things that are most frustrating to you at this moment? Don't worry, that's not my last question.
No, look, I think we don't need to waste time. Okay, I think that we are all aware to this terrible combination between an objective, critical moment in the history of Israel and a failing leadership. And this is the worst combination you can have when you read the books of the prophets, when you read the two books of Kings. You see that this is exactly the combination that led us to the first destruction. When you read the teachings of our sages in the Mishnah and the Midrashim, you see that this combination led us to the second destruction. We need to do our best in order to untie this dangerous combination of big challenges and small leaders.
All right. Final question from me. Where do you find hope? What makes you think that this is all possible?
First, I shared with you the numbers. We need to remember them. After we failed to hold our government, still 52% of Israelis didn't want this ultra-right-wing, ultra-nationalist, ultra-Orthodox government after our failure. So we have a solid base to believe that if we work wisely and if we come with modesty and creativity, we can really create a political shift after their enormous failure. Right? It's not a given thing. Politics is always a challenging business, as you all know. There are no guarantees, but I do think that we have a good base to start with when we plan the next national elections. But much more important, and again, I already shared it with you, you understand that last Motzei Shabbat, more than 500,000 Israelis marched in the streets of Tel Aviv. Do you understand that for the last 20 months, even during the time of war, hundreds of thousands of Israelis became to be activists after decades of just watching politics and not playing politics? And the most important thing, like all parents, we thought that our children belong to a spoiled generation. Their grandparents thought they are brilliant. But we, and I have three teenagers, we truly thought that something in the economic boom of Israel in the last few decades brought our youngsters, our children, to take things for granted. When you see the way the younger Israeli generation stood to this task of defending Israel, but also defending its core values, we have a very good reason to be optimistic.
Chaver Knesset, our friend Gilad Kariv, thank you so much. And before I release all of you up to our seats in our Shabbat service, I will say that we all join that younger generation and those hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the street praying for the safe return of the hostages who remain alive. Amen.
Thank you very
Shabbat
much.
Shalom.